Well, by now you know that Muammar Gaddafi is reported to be dead. It's coming in from everywhere, so we are assuming that it is true. Apparently, he was holed up in his hometown of Sirte, and now then he has been killed or else he's committed suicide. Different reports. One report says he was wounded in both legs and he crawled into a pipe and shot himself in the head. Other people are reporting that NATO killed him with their airstrikes. We don't know what the full truth is. Another report states that the rebels took his body and drug him through the streets, abusing him, celebrating because he was dead. If that is the case, I would certainly hope our government would have nothing more to do with people like that. That is pure barbarism. I'll never forget way back, what was it, almost 10 years ago now, a couple of Israeli soldiers wandered accidentally into Ramallah, and there they were caught by the Palestinians, who then killed them, dipped their hands in their blood. One Palestinian went up to the second floor of the police station and took his hands and just rubbed them right down a large window overlooking the street. One problem was there were pictures being taken, and those pictures eventually found themselves into the hands of the Israelis. Furthermore, I think the picture ended up on the front page of Time magazine. The Israelis kept the picture until they found the man who did it, and one day they captured him and placed him on trial. So, but I'll never forget the brutality that absolutely stunned me toward those two Israeli soldiers, because they took them as well and drugged them through the streets until the report was you couldn't even tell they had a head anymore. And so it was so gruesome. I thought, wow, what kind of animals can do that? It's one thing to fight a war. It's one thing to fight against your enemy, but it's another thing after your enemy's dead to just brutalize and to absolutely violate an image, a body. It's just beyond my comprehension. But apparently not everybody in the world thinks in a civilized fashion. Apparently there's a lot of barbarism yet going on. So the reports are still coming in. I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves today is, okay, what really happened here? I know President Obama has already issued congratulations to the revolutionaries, saying you have won your revolution. The report is that he was an absolute dictator for the last 42 years and that the people have now finally overthrown him. If, in fact, freedom is sweeping through the Middle East, of course, I, along with most everyone else, would be very, very happy that people are winning their liberty. If one tyranny is replaced with another, then that's not so good. So it is a banner day in the life of the nation of Libya. Libya is a very important country. If you don't know the geography, it's right on the Mediterranean Sea. Italy is on the north shore of the Mediterranean Sea. Libya is on the south shore. So Libya is very strategically placed as the gateway to the Middle East, and also has total access to the open waters of the Atlantic. And so it's an oil-producing country, very fine quality of oil, as a matter of fact, and so there was a lot of value there. Some people think this was a war fought over oil. Already American companies and British companies have moved in to claim the spoils. I don't know all of those details, although I have heard and I have read stories that appear to be credible, that major oil companies have already moved in. I'm talking about a couple of months ago, as soon as Gaddafi was driven out, that they moved in. Obviously, Gaddafi was fabulously wealthy. However, it apparently did him no good, because he died like a common soldier at the hands of the rebels. He fought to the end. He may well be considered a hero as a result. Now, there's another question that's bothering me, however. There's a scripture in the Bible that says, "He that lives by the sword will die by the sword." And it appears that America is moving toward a policy more and more of targeted assassination, whether it's Osama bin Laden or whether it is Gaddafi. Not saying that we did it. We don't know yet. It may well have been our planes that did it, because apparently Gaddafi, according to one report, was in a convoy attempting to escape from Sirte and to head elsewhere, but they were attacked from the air by NATO planes. And so that may have been the strike that actually was the killer of Gaddafi. We don't know. If, in fact, NATO bullets did kill Gaddafi, which apparently will come to light as the autopsy takes place, if we are considered the one doing it, I think we're setting a precedent that's very, very dangerous. Because like I quoted from the Bible, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. If you live by the assassination, you will end up dying by the assassination. There are people that are radically loyal to Muammar Gaddafi, radically loyal to Osama bin Laden. Will those people someday retaliate? Not wishing for anything like that. I'm simply saying, is the United States of America getting a reputation for being a Wild West gunslinging nation in the community of nations, or are we being seen as a responsible leader in the world community? Well, those are just some thoughts that I have today. We may have thoughts from you as we move forward. The capture and reported death of Libya's longtime tyrant was arguably the most dramatic event of the so-called Arab Spring, an eventful period of revolt that began in Tunisia towards the end of last year. And of course, we know it's now swept from Tunisia to Egypt to Libya and to many other, now working in Yemen, possibly in Syria. It all remains to be seen. But there's a real message being sent here. Once the United Nations kicks in, once the world government decides you must go, all the firepower of the world government, as expressed by the NATO forces, is allied against you. There's a scripture in the Bible about the world government of the end time. It says that the whole world will say about the end time world government, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him. So we're seeing more and more that nations realize that they are now part of a global government situation. And if they resist the will of the global government, they will reap the vengeance of the global government. I saw this taking place way back in the late 90s when Mr. Slobodan Milosevic, did not want to become part of the European Union. But there was a grand design already in place that all of Europe would unify and become a reborn Holy Roman Empire. Well, Mr. Slobodan Milosevic, understanding that this would spell the end of Yugoslavian sovereignty, resisted, did not want to join the European Union. Well, consequently, there were those who decided that Milosevic had to go. Among them was Mr. Bill Clinton himself. He moved in, beat the drums of war against Mr. Gaddafi, and then used the same NATO troops we're using now. So see, this is not a new thing. This dates back for almost 15 years. The NATO troops came in. The United Nations at that time would not approve the action because at that time it was in the Constitution of the United Nations that they only arbitrated between nations, not in the domestic affairs of nations. Well, all that has now changed because at the World Summit of 2005 at the United Nations, the community of nations adopted a new policy called responsibility to protect. And they said from now on, we cannot stand by when nations are abusing their own people. If a ruler or a government is convicted or at least alleged to be committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide against their peoples, then the world community cannot stand idly by. We must move in. So back then, the United Nations would not pass a resolution against Yugoslavia, but now the United Nations did pass a resolution against Muammar Gaddafi and the nation of Libya. Well, it looks like it's almost over, although the infighting will probably continue for a long, long time. They have an entire nation to rebuild after all the devastation that has taken place there. It's difficult sometimes to know who's really in charge, what's really taking place. I mean, we've been told that we've been fighting, NATO's been fighting side by side with Al-Qaeda. You scratch your head and say, wait, isn't that the enemy? Isn't Al-Qaeda the enemy? Well, that was yesterday. Today, they're our friend. I don't know. It's very confusing sometimes to try to figure out what's really going on. But I do know the big picture. And the big picture simply is that we are seeing the establishment of a system of global governance whose ultimate power resides in the United Nations. And NATO, which was a military without a cause until recently, has now apparently become the world army of the New World Order, of the global governance situation under the authority of the United Nations. So we're watching a work in progress here as we're seeing many people who believe the answer for the world's future is a system of global governance. Now, they always use the term global governance because they know we don't want a world government, so they never say that, but they always say global governance. No difference. Totally a difference in semantics. That's all. Global means world. Governance means government. Look it up in your dictionary. Global governance is world government, and we're watching it be established right now. I promise you, study the history of the United Nations. Everywhere it goes, it brings into power a government that will ultimately govern in its image. There's always strings attached when the aid comes pouring in. And if you'll study the history, almost every government that has been empowered by the United Nations ends up being a socialist government. I know I had a friend recently who visited Zimbabwe, where Mr. Mugabe took over. Mr. Mugabe is a Marxist to his bone marrow. He was placed in there by Mr. Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter voted against the white minority government and voted for Mr. Mugabe. The white minority government said, wait, we'll turn power over to the blacks. We understand the justice of that. However, we don't want to turn power over to Mugabe. He's a Marxist. The United Nations says, no, that's who you're going to turn power over to. They had a moderate black that would have embraced free enterprise. But no, the United Nations, and then finally Jimmy Carter sided with Mugabe. Now then, well, Zimbabwe's the poorest country in Africa today. That's the result of that experiment.